In 1946, a P-239 plutonium core scheduled for detonation by nuclear bomb was harmlessly melted down and reintegrated into the United States' nuclear stockpile. That was the end of a 14-pound metallic sphere that had killed 2 scientists not 11 months before. This is the true story of the demon. The spheres of atomic material that had obliterated the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki would have easily fit in your hand, and they were light enough to carry. Because of the extreme levels of radiation coming from them, the cores were carried around in secure containers, but curious physicists reported that the cores were disturbingly warm to the touch. Both the Little Boy and Fat Man nuclear bombs use subcritical masses of uranium and plutonium respectively, meaning that no self-sustaining nuclear reaction would be possible with the spheres alone, and the nickel plating that covered them would prevent most of the escaping radiation from harming you. The real harm comes later. The terrible explosions that Little Boy and Fat Man are famous for only happen when a nuclear core goes critical, using directed conventional explosives to artificially induce a critical mass. This meant literally compressing a plutonium or uranium sphere into a much smaller volume with explosions. Now, neutrons emitted from natural radioactivity would be much more likely to go on and impact other atoms before escaping, leading to a chain reaction of exponentially more and more atoms releasing tremendous energy. At the heart of an atomic blast is a radioactive core filled with atoms poised like rat traps. All the bomb itself does is force one of those traps to snap. The so-called Demon Core was the third core of fissionable nuclear material made during the World War II era. It was also supposed to be dropped on Japan, but after the Empire's prompt surrender, following the obliteration of Nagasaki, the core had no immediate military use. Instead, a physicist working at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico after the war decided to use the remaining core to figure out just what it takes to make a core like this go critical. When Otto Robert Frisch first arrived in the United States, he was placed at Los Alamos to study neutron multiplication in uranium and plutonium. These elements naturally radiate neutrons in the process of nuclear decay, and as we said, if there is enough of the radioactive element close enough together, these neutrons can go on to cause the rat trap style reaction as neutrons slam more neutrons free from other atoms. However, there is another way to force criticality other than just having a giant sphere of plutonium, which would be hard to make. It turns out that if you use a very thick material to reflect neutrons coming out of the material back upon itself, like a mirror would, a self-sustaining reaction can occur with substantially less plutonium or uranium. Even though an explosion might not happen after criticality is reached in all cases, a deadly blast of radiation certainly could. And that's exactly what happened. By 1944, Frisch was leading the critical assembly group at Los Alamos and started a dangerous series of near-criticality testing. The physicists in the group wanted to use neutron-reflective materials around spheres of plutonium and uranium to see just how close they could get to going critical, without explosives and without going over the edge. Commenting on the inherent risk of experiments of this kind, legendary physicist Richard Feynman reportedly said that the experiments were like, quote, tickling the tail of a sleeping dragon, end quote. But even with the very real possibility of being roasted alive by the radioactive fire of a failed criticality test, the tickling the dragon's tail experiments continued. Within 2 years, neutron reflection experiments on the Demon Core would claim the lives of 2 scientists, Harry K. Daghlian Jr. and Louis Slotin, in almost the exact same way. On August 21, 1945, Harry K. Daghlian Jr. was conducting a criticality experiment with the Demon Core. He was placing tungsten carbide bricks around the mass of plutonium to see how many bricks and in what orientation it would take to reflect enough neutrons to cause the core to go critical. That afternoon, using a Geiger counter-like device to measure the radiation coming off of the plutonium, he got close enough to criticality that he decided to end the experiment. Now, this result should have been worth just a few graphite streaks in a notebook and maybe a beer at the local bar with the other physicists, but Daghlian was curious. Later that night, he returned, alone, to his assembly for another test. Like the tests before, Daghlian created an orientation of bricks that his measuring device told him was nearly critical. As he was placing one last brick, the measuring device indicated that the core would go critical if he continued on the assembly. The dragon would wake up. So cautiously, he began removing the final brick, and then he dropped it. The moment the brick hit the assembly, the Demon Core instantly went supercritical. and according to Doglian, there was a blast of blue light and a wave of heat. Doglian reacted quickly, though, and used his right hand to knock the drop brick all the way to the floor. In those fractions of a second, Harry had received a fatal dose of radiation. In fact, he had endured what was likely the highest acute dose of radiation of any human in history. 25 days later, Doglian fell into a coma and died from organ failure owing to severe radiation poisoning. This photo, taken 9 days after the accident by medical staff, is of the hand that Harry had used to stop the Demon Core. He was 24. Harry wasn't completely alone and experimenting in the lab that night. A security guard, Private Robert J. Hemmerly, was also sitting at his desk next to Doglian reading his newspaper. Hemmerly died 33 years after Doglian Jr. from what is now considered to be radiation-caused leukemia. He was 29 and the father of 2 at the time of exposure. Harry K. Doglian Jr. was the first official fatality from a criticality accident and the first American casualty of the atomic age. He had arranged to have his body donated to science after his inevitable end, so that scientists could study the effects of radiation exposure on the human body. During the 25 days after his fatal mistake, Doglian's colleague, Louis Slotin, spent many hours at his bedside, comforting the 24-year-old as radiation poisoning slowly claimed him. Exactly 7 months later, in the same hospital, Louis Slotin would suffer the exact same fate. By 1946, physicist Louis Slotin had taken over the critical assembly group from Frisch. Though the criticality experiments were moved from the Omega site at Los Alamos to the Palajito laboratory, the dangerous nature of the experiments did not change. In addition to Feynman's continued warnings, physicist Enrico Fermi said that, quote, "Keep doing that experiment that way, and you'll be dead within a year." But Louis Slotin wasn't worried, and the experiments continued. On May 21, 1946, Slotin was conducting another criticality experiment with the Demon Core. This time, though, instead of using tungsten bricks, Slotin was testing the critical point of the core by placing it inside 2 half spheres made of beryllium and lowering those halves until there was just a sliver of space before the sphere was complete. If the core was completely enclosed, the reflection of neutrons would be total, and the dragon would wake again. The local expert among experts, Slotin was reportedly brash in his experimental protocols. In his signature pair of blue jeans and cowboy boots, Slotin would perform the criticality tests without the fail-safe spacers that would sit on the half-spheres and keep it from ever completely closing. Instead, he would put his bare hand on the top half-sphere and attempt to lower it using only the blade of a flathead screwdriver. That way, he could get much closer to criticality. And Slotin had successfully completed this experiment dozens of times. The afternoon of the accident, Louis Slotin was conducting the same screwdriver experiment as 7 other colleagues recorded and watched. It was just like the test before, but for whatever reason, this time, the screwdriver slipped. The moment the spheres touched, the Demon Core went prompt critical. The reflected neutrons coming from the plutonium inside the sphere instantly initiated supercriticality. Like the Doglian accident, there was a flash of blue light and a wave of the dragon's heat before Slotin could flip the top half sphere off of the assembly. Naturally, the 7 other scientists in the room ran out as fast as they could as the accident occurred, but Slotin shouted them all to get back and tossed them a stick of chalk. He told them each to mark down precisely where they were standing. By establishing their positions relative to the Demon Core, Slotin would be able to calculate just how much radiation each person had just absorbed, and how much their lives had just been shortened. According to physicist Raymer Schreiber, who was present in the room with Slotin that day, Slotin's first words immediately after the incident were, quote, "Well, that does it." Louis Slotin died of severe radiation poisoning 9 days later at the age of 35. He died in the same hospital as Harry Doglian Jr. on another Tuesday the 21st as a result of the same accident with the same hunk of radioactive material. They even were cared for by the same nurse. The demonstration that day was supposed to be the